Hello and welcome back to this webinar series on Introduction to Excel for Pharmacists. Today we're on webinar 6, which is going to be the first part of Formulae and Functions. So here we're faced with our data set. We will have seen it before in the previous webinars, but in this case it's running left to right. Now this isn't particularly useful for us to do any analysis on. It's very good if we, for example, want to look at a particular patient, for example, Mr. Smith, for example. We can highlight that. We can see all the information about him. That's great. But if we want to work on the full data set, it's very difficult because we end up scrolling side to side and it makes our data very difficult to look at. So today in this webinar, we're going to look at how to transpose our data, how to turn our data from a horizontal sheet to a vertical sheet, which makes it much easier for us to work with. We're then going to move on to how to count the number of cells or how to calculate the number of participants in this particular data set. We're also going to be looking at how to average and also how to do a total. So first of all, onto the transpose function. So in order to transpose, to turn our data vertical so that we can work with it, we're going to press up in the top left-hand corner of our data set. And we're going to highlight it all by clicking and dragging over the whole data set, and you see this green bordered sort of grayed out area that shows where you want to highlight, and we're going to move that all the way to the end of the sheet, all the way to the end of our data set there. And we're then going to right click and then click copy. In your case, you're then going to generate a new sheet, which is by moving your mouse, like your cursor down to the bottom of the Excel sheet, you will see a little plus down here where my mouse is. If you click that, you will generate a new clean sheet. In this case, I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to click up in the top left-hand corner again, and then right-click, and we're going to go to Paste Options. We talked a little bit about this in previous webinars, but we can bring our data set in as simply the data as it was, just the numbers, the formulas themselves, or we can use this function, the transpose function here. I'm going to click that one. So our data has now been turned from a horizontal data set into a vertical one. And we can see here our patient data now runs top to bottom, running down. Yeah, and there's no corruptions and it all looks good. So we've still got 100 patients in our data set. And now we can begin to work on data. So in this case, we'd like to calculate the number of patients in our trial, and or in our data set. And there's a few different ways of doing this, but the simplest way is to start off with an equal sign. So that lets Excel know that we're going to be using a formula. So it puts itself into its, I suppose, its maths function. So it takes it out of text and allows you to type a formula in. And we're going to type in count. So there's a multitude of different suggestions that Excel has for us here, but we're going to select the top one, which is just count, and that is for the number of cells that in the range that contain numbers. So that's any cells we've got that contain a number, it'll count that as 1. So by clicking on that one, we can then, for example, if we want to calculate it based on number of patient IDs, we can click up here. And keeping your cursor depressed, scroll down through the data set, and you'll see this dotted line highlighting your data. So we've put our range in there, and we're now going to press to add a closed brackets, and that finishes our formula. And we can see that we have 100 patients in this data set. We're also interested in the, for example, average age of our participants here. And we can do that in a similar fashion. So by clicking in the cell we'd like to add our formula into, and then pressing the equals key. From there, we can then simply type in, if we're after a mean, we can type in average. We could do the same for mode or median, simply by typing mode or median. But in this case, average calculates a mean for us. So we're going to click that, and we're faced with a similar sort of set up to be well with the last set, and we're going to now click on the top of our data set and drag it down through our series of data. Again, finishing it with the closed brackets. By pressing the Enter key, we can now see that our average age is 38.28 years. And we can change the number of decimal points that's to, decimal places that's to, by clicking up here in the number column and clicking this decrease decimal button. So average age is 38. Again, we can, if we're interested in what the total age, all in the sum of the age of our data set is, we can, by the same notion, start with an equals, and in this case, press sum. So by double clicking sum, we can do the same thing again and click and drag through our data set. And that gives us a total age of 3,828 years for our data set. This has been a very quick and whistle-stop tour of a few basic formulae that you can carry out in Excel. And in the next webinar, we'll look at if and and functions, so more of Excel's logical tests. There are loads of different, hundreds of different formulas that you can carry out in Excel, and there's some really good resources online and lists of different formulas for different functions. And if you need more help on this, then we'll be going into more depth in this in subsequent webinars. Thank you very much.